Hi, and welcome to NP Student, where we are keeping you updated with every aspect of your life in and out of school. I'm Dr. Patrice Little, and we are continuing our conversation with nurses who are making a difference in celebration of Nurses Month. Joining us today is Dr. Kimberly Gordon. She is the co founder of Healing Politics and co-founder of Healing Politics, a nonprofit organization that helps nurses run for office. And so we will talk about how to run for office as a nurse. Thank you for joining us, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm doing great, Patrice. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, let's get started. Tell us a little bit about your background as a certified registered nurse assistant and how you segue into this wonderful organization that helps nurses have a greater impact through office.
So first, I'm a reformed accountant. I was an accountant before I was a nurse, went back to nursing school, and then got my master's degree, nurse anesthesia. And then I went back for my DNP pretty far along into my career. I ended up going to Yale University for my doctorate of nursing practice degree. And Healing Politics is actually an offshoot of my DNP project. While I was there, my advisor, Dr. Lisa Summers, who is now my partner in Healing Politics, but she was then my advisor, we had talked about what sort of areas to explore for this DNP project. And what happened is I had run a fellow CRNA's campaign. So we ran that campaign. The CRNA lost, unfortunately, but we learned a lot. And so Lisa, when I got to Yale, was like, why aren't you guys working on a project that looks at why more nurses don't run for elected office? And so that's what we did. We created the first candidate school for nurses and midwives, and it was to be piloted at Yale in in May of 2020. And so, of course, COVID um, derailed that whole plan. But when I graduated in 2021, Lisa and I just didn't want to let it go. She retired from Yale, and we formed Healing Politics, a nonprofit organization, in December of 2021. And we're about to hold our first campaign school in May just this later this week.
Yes, I'm excited about the inaugural campaign school, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But let's backtrack a little bit and talk about okay, nurses running for office. How does one go about deciding to run for office, and what's some reasons that they would run?
That is a great question. The reason why you would run are probably as individual as the nurses who do run. So for example, the nurse Sharon Pierce that I worked with, she and I were both very involved in our professional association. And so we were often working on full practice authority for all APRNs in North Carolina. So that was what drove us to be politically active and in advocating for our profession, and then to run for elected office. So we do hear that a lot from APRNs around the United States that don't have full practice authority in their states yet, that's a big deal. And when you talk to, if you're advocating for your profession, you know that many legislators just don't understand the importance of APRNs, what we bring to the table. So that's a pretty common one. Now, unfortunately, we hear a lot after Roe versus Wade and the Dobbs decision. So women's health care, maternal fetal mortality rates
Yes.
in our country are a big motivator for nurses. But it can be things like we have nurses coming to the campaign school who've always been environmentalists. And so they're coming from a reason technically outside of nursing, but part of health, community health. So there are tons of reasons. And it comes down to maybe you have a pothole that's at the end of your street that you really want filled. And so you're going to run for city council so you can tell them about that because they haven't been receptive to whatever you've been talking about. So all levels of government, local, state, federal. There are many different reasons why nurses run, but it's always the one thing I will say is that nurses see health in all policies. So whether we're talking about environmentalism or education or transportation, in where I live in North Carolina in the Triad area here, housing, affordable housing has been a huge issue for over a decade. So that's a really big deal here. So many different reasons about how you can improve the health of your community.
And I understand that in order to be impactful, that it takes a lot of time, development. In addition to that, positioning. How does becoming an elected official as a nurse start? So, like, what's the very first step?
Sure. Professional organization involvement is
Okay.
so very important because that's where nurses learn a lot of their advocacy skills. They learn they're refreshed from the civics that we learned in high school about how a bill becomes a law and how things work in your
Mhm.
state legislature often. So that professional organization involvement not only gets advocacy and leadership, but it can also get you a voter base and volunteers. All of those nurses who you are learning with and attending conferences and on committees with can all help you when it comes time for you to throw your hat in the ring and run for office.
And what makes nurses qualified? Because I believe that's like a common question. I've had people ask me that since I've started some of my work in policy. They're like, well, how'd you get started? And
Mhm.
really what qualifies you? And I guess you can talk a little bit also what disqualifies a nurse for running for office.
Yeah, nothing disqualifies a nurse for running for office. What we don't do is we don't give ourselves enough credit for what we know about our communities. And so nurses are extremely well prepared to run for office. We are excellent, excellent communicators. We develop trust with patients at a moment's notice when you walk in and meet that patient for the first time, and you're instantly building that rapport. Nurses do that very, very well. We're excellent listeners. We make data driven decisions. We function in super high pressure environments and with a clear head, and we're able to think through things. Negotiating skills, conflict resolution, team building, and teamwork, tenacity. If you've got a patient and they need a CT scan for an emergency, change or something, that I can promise you that nurse is getting her patient in before anybody else is getting their patient
Yeah.
for a scan. But those are all skills that translate to working with legislators in a legislature, whether it be advocacy or with your fellow legislators running for office. I can't tell you how many nurses that are sitting in office will tell us that they're viewed as experts in public health, in healthcare, that they'll be taking a vote on an issue and the legislators are looking back like, thumbs up or thumbs down. Do you agree with this? Do you disagree with this? We're experts in so many different things because we see our communities through our patients' eyes. We don't necessarily have to experience being unhoused to understand what that means for a person in our community. Or when you hand somebody a form to sign or fill out. You don't have to not know how to read or write to understand what that means in functioning in our communities. We see all of those things. And so we're able to not just communicate with patients and families, people who don't understand healthcare, but we're also communicating with other members of the healthcare team in their language. I mean, we're great at meeting people where they are, and that is such an important skill when you're talking about legislating and serving constituents.
So it really sounds like that we are very rich in with transferable skills.
Yeah.
And it's really about knowing how to utilize it for that a different area, which is being an elected official. So this is a great time to segue into the inaugural campaign school.
Mhm.
Because if anything, you could go to school to learn, but there wasn't a school that existed prior to this for our profession. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about the inaugural campaign school for nurses and nurse midwives.
So this was so important because there are occupation-based schools. The physicians, the American Medical Association has had a campaign school for decades. The OBGYNs also have had a campaign school for decades where they're training physicians, their spouses, residents to run for office. Bankers have a campaign school, social workers have campaign schools,
Mhm.
artists, scientists. But nurses don't have we've never had a campaign school. We've always talked about doing this, about running for office, about advocating for our profession, but we've never gone that extra step and actually done it. And what we find is that you could go to, I mean, there are women's campaign schools, there are veterans campaign schools, there are issue oriented campaign schools. So whether it's women's health or environment, there are plenty of different campaign schools to go to. However, what we know about people who attend those occupation based schools are they're forming a network of people that understand what it's like to be a nurse running for office. And that network that you build is going to be there forever and ever, whether you run for office next week or next year or 5 years from now. You have this cohort of people that you've developed relationships with that are lasting. And as you're running for office, if you have a horrible day knocking on doors or dropping off flyers, you can say, "Oh my gosh, Patrice, can you believe what a horrible day it was?" And you may have had that experience too. So it really is not just a support network, but a learning network, and having that common ground with which to operate from. And then being a nurse as well. I mean, that's how we identify ourselves, I believe. Nurses, bankers are one thing. I mean, you go to work 9 to 5, you count the money, you sign the loans, do whatever. But nurses really identify as being nurses. When we come home after work, we don't just leave it behind.
Mhm.
So it really is a great way to network and commiserate and find support for running for office and just for being a nurse.
And one of the things I look forward to, I might as well say that I'll be attending this year, is I really look forward into learning those steps with campaigning because with anything, it's intimidating that when it involves a lot of money up front. And can you talk to us a little bit about that campaigning process? Because it's like, okay, after you announce your candidacy,
Mhm,
it's really now it's about campaigning and campaigning costs. Can
mhm.
you expand a little bit more on that?
So we'll talk a little bit about money and manpower and messaging later this week. But the one thing that nurses have that we don't use is a
Mhm.
built-in network of nurses. So there are 4.3 million nurses in the United States. If everybody donated, I mean, even if 100,000 of them donated $1 to your campaign, I mean, think about the war chest that you would have. I mean, we have such power that we're not using. And those same nurses, whether they live in your district or not, can contribute to your campaign. They can knock on doors for you if they live in your area. They can make phone calls if they don't. I mean, when Sharon was running for office, we had people all over the United States making phone calls to her voters saying, talking about her, will you vote for Sharon Pierce for
Mhm.
North Carolina House? We have such a network that we don't use that. We don't think about it. I don't think as nurses, we don't
Mhm.
think about this as something we can do. But boy, I can't even tell. I'm so excited for all of the nurses that are going to come and join us this next week, because as you go back to your units, your workplaces, your hospitals, your clinics, you're going to be telling other nurses about what you've done. And those are the nurses, if they can't vote for you, like I said, they can donate, they can volunteer, they can help you with this process. That's a bigger advantage than almost any other profession if you think about it.
And according to, I believe, the American Nurses Association, we're like 4 million strong. So can you imagine tapping into the nursing organization? It's so important to, at this level, to be in an association that's associated with your specialty. So,
Yes.
for instance, American Association of Nurse Practitioners would be the organization I'll be tapped into. But I'm also thinking about tapping back into Sigma Theta Tau since it's been a while. But it's really about understanding what where you are riches, and your wealth is really within the community, the people that you know. And I wanted to share the link to donation because from my understanding you all are also like on, and then this is a continuous basis just to make sure you support the platform as well as other activities that are involved. You guys have a link to your donation. Can you tell us a little bit about how those monies will be allocated, and also highlight how you guys are also a nonprofit organization, so the tax and the fact that it's tax deductible as well?
Yeah, that's a huge bonus. We are tax deductible. If you make a donation, it's tax
Yes.
deductible. That's wonderful. And we
Yeah.
actually set ourselves up like
Mhm,
that purposely in
mhm,
hopes that once we run this campaign school, we can apply for funding from foundations and organizations that can help us move to that next level. We use a lot of the money we raise for the campaign school. We're doing a 3.5 day in-person campaign school, and we're charging about half of what it costs to put the campaign school on because we know that nurses aren't rolling around in money. I mean, we don't have thousands and thousands of dollars at our disposal to go for this 3.5 day training. So we want to be able to support nurses who can't pay $3,000 to go to a campaign school. So some of the donations go to that. We also have we have a website, and the QR code will take you there as well, where you'll learn that we do free monthly events. We do an event every month around nurses running for office, or how to help nurses run for office, or how to help nurse-friendly candidates run for office, how to become more civically engaged. We're going to do an event with Vote ER for Civic Health Month in August. And all of those activities are free. And by donations, that helps us keep our website up and running, and our pays our web designer and all of the different platforms we use to keep in touch with. We don't have members, we don't charge a membership fee, but all of the nurses who are interested in learning more, helping nurses to run for office, running for offices themselves, or just want to be involved and know what's going on in their state.
and one thing I wanted to add to that is that along with the webinars that you have, you also do this post called See It to Become It. Am I saying that correctly?
See it to be it.
See
Yes.
It to Be It. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So this was something that we came across in the research for our DNP projects. And I have to tell you, you can make a DNP project for all of the people out there who are thinking about going back to school and then perhaps going straight into their DNP. There are plenty of nurse practitioner and APRN programs that do that now. You can actually make that project something useful for the profession, or explore something that you're interested in. So this was information that we came across in a dissertation about how important it was, that role modeling piece, and in particular to women, but all nurses. And we know that 80% of nurses are women, but how important it was to see somebody like you in that position. You have to see it to be it. You have to understand that the nurse that's in your state legislature or on your city council is also a bedside nurse, or maybe a nurse practitioner, or maybe a public health nurse that goes to work every day. But then they also do this community. This is their community service. This is their public service. This is their way to giving back to their communities. But they're people just like you, and you can do that too. And so that see it to be it piece has been incredibly important, because you learn more other than Linda Gorton is the mayor of Louisville, of Lexington, Kentucky.
Mhm.
She's a former ICU nurse. And Gail Adcock, nurse practitioner, is more than somebody who works in the General Assembly. She ran a clinic. She employed, hundreds of people in her primary healthcare clinic. So incredibly important for us to understand that this is an area we need to be in and that we can be in. We can do this.
And with that being said, I usually ask all of my guests to finish this statement. If I knew then what I know now, blank.
If I knew how important nurses were to our communities and our health system and how important they can be to our public policy formation, I would have never become an accountant. I would have become a nurse. I would have become a nurse right out of high school. I would have done this and had more runway to do a little bit more. I'm 52 years old, so I don't have, 40 years to do this work, which I just absolutely love. But and I wish that all nurses understood the power that they have to make their communities better places, because they do, no matter how they do it.
Well, thank you for joining us, Dr. Gordon, and thank you for those nice words and inspiration as well as wisdom. I am Dr. Patrice Little, and we have just talked about how to run for public office. Be sure to follow at NP Student Magazine on Instagram and YouTube, and at NP Student on LinkedIn, and tune in next week at 7 p.m. on Sunday for our final show for the nurses who make a difference, who are making a difference in celebration of Nurses Month.